He was leading. Not surviving, not hanging on, but leading the biggest race of the summer. And then, in the space of about 2 seconds, Kyle Larson went from first place at Indianapolis Motor Speedway to 39th, dead last, with 1 point to show for the entire afternoon. Nobody hit him. Nobody touched him. The number 5 Hendrick Motorsports Chevrolet simply snapped sideways entering turn 3 and slammed backward into the wall. On the pit box, crew chief Cliff Daniels froze. Minutes later, he was standing face-to-face with Goodyear representatives. And when Kyle Larson finally climbed out and spoke, the very first thing he said was not about the crash at all. It was about a number. 0.3 of a second. Here is why that number matters more than anything else that happened on Sunday. To understand the scale of what Kyle Larson lost on lap 45, you first have to understand what he was on course to gain. The Brickyard 400 is not an ordinary points-paying weekend on the NASCAR Cup Series calendar. It is a crown jewel event, one of the small handful of races that define a driver's record long after the season ends. Kyle Larson already has his name on that list. He won the Brickyard 400 in 2024, and his connection to this specific piece of ground runs deeper than a single trophy, because he also started the Indianapolis 500 in both 2024 and 2025. Few active drivers have logged as many competitive miles around the 2.5-mile oval in as short a span of time. He arrived on Sunday, July 26, 2026, and qualified 10th. That is a solid starting position rather than a spectacular one, and on its own it did not suggest what was coming. The transformation came from strategy. Crew chief Cliff Daniels called Kyle Larson to pit road early on lap 27, well ahead of the cars around him. The undercut worked exactly as intended. As the rest of the field cycled through their own stops, the number 5 Chevrolet climbed the running order, passing car after car without needing to make a single aggressive move on track. By lap 40, Kyle Larson was out front and running down the opening stage win. He had turned a 10th place starting spot into the lead of a crown jewel race in under an hour, and he had done it cleanly. Then came lap 45. There were roughly 5 to 6 laps remaining in the opening stage. Kyle Larson was leading Ty Gibbs, managing his fuel, and running well inside the limit of the car. Entering turn 3, a rear tire on the number 5 Chevrolet failed. There was no contact with another vehicle, there was no scrape along the wall beforehand, no visible debris, and no sign of trouble on the previous lap. At the speeds carried into turn 3 at Indianapolis Motor Speedway, a rear tire failure removes the driver from the equation almost entirely. Once the rear of the car steps out at that entry speed, there is no correction available. The car rotates, and the only remaining variable is which part of it reaches the wall first. In this case, the number 5 Chevrolet turned backward and struck the outside wall hard before sliding to a stop. Over the radio, Kyle Larson told his team that he believed he had cut a left rear tire. It is worth being precise about this because the initial reports were not consistent. Some outlets reported that the right rear failed, others reported the left rear. Kyle Larson himself, when asked directly in the moments afterwards, said that he thought it was the left rear, but could not be certain which side had gone. That uncertainty is not unusual after a fast spin, and it is part of why the team wanted a technical answer rather than a driver impression. The reaction on the pit box is one of the most telling details of the entire afternoon. Cliff Daniels reacted with visible shock and disbelief as the car turned around. Shortly after, he was seen speaking with Goodyear representatives. That sequence matters. A crew chief who believes his driver overdrove the corner does not immediately seek out the tire manufacturer. A crew chief who believes the equipment failed does. Kyle Larson climbed from the car under his own power. He was taken to the infield care center, checked, and cleared. His day ended there. The finishing position was 39th, last in the field. And the points haul was a single point. What he said next is the reason this story traveled well beyond the usual race recap. Standing outside the infield care center, Kyle Larson opened with a plain statement of cause. We just had a tire let go. Then, without being prompted, he moved straight to the accusation he knew was coming. I wouldn't say pushing it had anything to do with it. And then came the number. I was only going 3/10 quicker than I had been with saving fuel. His summary of the whole episode was equally direct. It was just a little bit of bad luck, I guess. Consider what that 3/10 reference actually represents. Kyle Larson had just been eliminated from a crown jewel race while leading, and within minutes of getting out of the car, he was quantifying his own pace to demonstrate that he had not been leaning on the tire. He was not running qualifying laps, he was fuel saving, and the difference between his fuel saving pace and his pace at the moment of failure was 3/10 of a second. That is a small margin, and citing it was a deliberate act of preempting the question. He was equally clear about the absence of warning signs. I had no warning, right when I lifted. He then described feeling the car drop before it spun. Asked whether the number 5 team had experienced any tire issues at any point across the weekend, his answer was that there had been none that he had heard about. This was not a car that had been slowly going away over a long run. There was no vibration and no loss of grip building up over several laps. His next remarks were directed at his own crew. I'm proud of this number 5 Chevrolet team. He then broke down what they had accomplished before the failure. We qualified 10th and did what we had to do to gain the track position to get to the lead. And on the execution of that plan, he was unambiguous. We executed all of that really well. He also noted that there was still a large portion of the race remaining and that the team had positioned itself well within the strategy to contend for the victory. Then came the line that closed the subject. It's a bummer, but we'll get back after it at Iowa. Speaking to another outlet, his opening word on the result was simply this: obviously disappointing. He followed it by describing the crash as part of racing. Across every one of those statements, one thing is consistently absent. Kyle Larson did not blame Goodyear. He did not blame Cliff Daniels or the pit crew. He did not blame the fuel-saving strategy that had put him in the lead in the first place. For a driver in the middle of the roughest stretch of his season, that is a measured public response. It is also worth placing alongside the fact that Cliff Daniels went directly to the tire manufacturer. The team wanted answers, even if the driver was not publicly demanding them. The reason this single result carries so much weight is the pattern it completes. On July 5th at Chicagoland Speedway, Kyle Larson spun from inside the top 5, fell 2 laps down, and never recovered. At Echo Park Speedway, he sustained damage in a late crash down the backstretch and then went spinning again in a separate incident. At North Wilkesboro Speedway, he took damage after contact with Connor Zilisch on pit road, though on that occasion he recovered to finish 15th. And now Indianapolis Motor Speedway, 39th. That is 3 finishes of 30th or worse in his last 4 starts. The critical detail within that run is that speed has not been the problem. He was leading at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. He was running inside the top 5 at Chicagoland Speedway. The finishing positions do not reflect the pace of the cars he has been given. The consequence in the standings is measurable. He entered the Brickyard 406th in the championship and left it 8th. He also remains winless in 2026, and that drought now stretches back beyond his 2025 Indianapolis 500 and Coca-Cola 600 double attempt, which is an unusual statistic for a 2-time series champion. Hendrick Motorsports did not escape the rest of the afternoon either. Not long after Kyle Larson exited, his teammate Chase Elliott hit the wall following contact with Ricky Stenhouse Jr., and the number 9 Chevrolet went behind the wall as well. 2 of the organization's 4 cars were out. There is a counter-argument circulating among fans that deserves to be addressed rather than ignored. The argument holds that Hendrick Motorsports does not currently have winning speed, that the Toyota teams have taken control of the intermediate tracks that were once the number 5 team's strongest asset, and that the organization cannot break through a 5th to 7th place ceiling unless strategy falls its way. There is evidence offered for that view across the season. There is also a direct piece of evidence against it from Sunday, which is that Kyle Larson was leading the Brickyard 400 on merit at the moment the tire failed. A car incapable of running better than 7th does not lead a crown jewel race outright. Kyle Larson was also not the only driver to lose a rear tire at Indianapolis Motor Speedway on Sunday. On lap 96, Daniel Dye lost control of the number 78 Colleague Racing Chevrolet exiting turn 3 and hit the wall, bringing out the third caution of the race and carrying it through to the end of the second stage. His description of the failure closely echoed what Kyle Larson had said 50 laps earlier. "I thought it was the right rear, but I don't have enough laps in the Cup car to know what a flat tire feels like." He believed a left rear had gone down roughly 3/4 of the way along the back stretch, leaving him unable to slow the car sufficiently before it looped around. "Did my best to keep it off the wall and ultimately just slammed into the wall." 2 rear tire failures. The same corner. The same race. 2 drivers, neither of whom could state with confidence which side had failed, and both of whom described being caught without warning. Whether those were 2 isolated failures or evidence of a tire operating close to its limit under the specific loads of Turn 3 at Indianapolis Motor Speedway remains unresolved. What is established is that at least one crew chief went looking for that answer before the race had finished. A separate incident later in the race should not be confused with either of those 2. On lap 120, Ryan Blaney was spun after contact with John Hunter Nemechek, sending the number 12 Team Penske Ford into the wall entering turn 3. 9 cars in total were collected in that accident, and it brought out the 5th caution of the day. Ryan Blaney fell to 31st. The cost extended beyond the race result because that finish decided the NASCAR In-Season Challenge, and Todd Gilliland claimed the $1 million bonus. While all of that unfolded, the race was won by a driver who is not even competing full-time. Cory Heim in the number 672311 Racing Toyota held off Christopher Bell and Joey Logano to take the 2026 Brickyard 400. The context makes the result more remarkable. Cory Heim has made 15 career starts at this level. This was his second victory of 2026, following the inaugural race at Naval Base Coronado, a street course. A street circuit run for the first time and a historic oval with decades of accumulated data represent opposite ends of the discipline, and he won both. He is the reigning NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series champion, was signed to a development contract by Denny Hamlin in 2024, and will move into the number 35 car full-time in 2027. Across his recent stretch of starts, he has averaged 28.5 points per race, which outpaces Chase Briscoe at 28.3, despite making 14 fewer starts this season. His own account of the closing laps was blunt. "That was a damn handful." He described the moment the track changed. "I was hanging on for dear life once the shade went down and the pace picked up." On what the win represents, he said this: "I just couldn't fathom telling myself as a little kid that I was going to be a crown jewel winner one day." Christopher Bell, who spent the final run waiting for a mistake that never arrived, was direct in his assessment. Cory put together a magnificent last run. He noted that his spotters were reporting the leader was loose and that he could see the car moving around, and then delivered the summary. He didn't make a mistake and won the race. Crew Chief Booty Barker described the Brickyard 400 as the most difficult race to win, requiring a complete weekend of execution with no mistakes, and singled out the mental discipline required to hit every corner correctly while running in traffic. Dave Rogers, competition director at 2311 Racing, explained the preparation behind it, noting that Cory Heim turned down full-time opportunities in order to develop properly and spends extensive time in Toyota's driver in the loop simulator. "I dare say he probably has more simulator laps than anyone when we unload." Asked about the driver's ceiling, Dave Rogers said he does not believe there is one. One further result is worth recording. Ty Gibbs won the opening stage and led 46 laps, but changing track conditions and late strategy dropped him to 12th at the finish. That brings the focus to what comes next. There is an off week immediately following Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And then 4 races remain before the chase begins: Iowa Speedway, Richmond Raceway, New Hampshire Motor Speedway at Loudon, and Daytona International Speedway. The Iowa Corn 350 weekend opens with practice and qualifying on Saturday, August 8th at 2 o'clock Eastern on True TV. The seating stakes are concrete. Every position matters for the reset that follows Daytona International Speedway. And sitting 8th rather than 5th is a genuine disadvantage before a single elimination race has been run. Kyle Larson is locked into the playoffs on points regardless of what happens over the next month. What the last 4 weeks have removed is seating position and momentum, along with the accumulated confidence a team normally carries into the elimination rounds. The counterweight is straightforward. He was leading the Brickyard 400 when the tire failed. The pace was there. One clean weekend at Iowa Speedway changes the shape of the entire conversation. Which leaves one question worth putting to you directly. Is this a run of bad luck, or is Hendrick Motorsports genuinely off the pace right now? Those two answers point toward very different second halves of the 2026 season.